everyone. Good evening, Kaya. Welcome to tonight's series, Disclosure. It's really wonderful to be here tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us in the front garden. Before we go any further, I acknowledge that we are all gathered here tonight in Walilap on Wajak Noongar Budja, and pay my respects to elders, past and present, to their descendants, to their families, to their communities, and to any Noongar and First Nations people here tonight. I'd like us to take a minute just to reflect on how we can all tread more lightly on this incredible country and celebrate the generosity of the Noongar people. So welcome to our first disclosure for the year, featuring Jasmine Togo-Brisby. One of the 3 exhibiting artists from Other Horizons are offering for this year's Perth Festival, which riffs off the festival's theme of Jinda, the Noongar word for stars. Journeys under a shared sky across vast seas to the continent we now call Australia, some revealing the terror of slavery, others focusing in on early migration histories, are offered alongside cinematic depictions of contemporary First Nations ritual, spirituality, and power in Other Horizons. Comprised of 3 independent artist projects, Other Horizons presents the work of South Sudanese artist Atonga Tem, Gunditjmara and Jabawaranga artist Hayley Miller-Baker, and Australian South Sea artist Jasmine Togo-Brisby, celebrating the works of First Nations women and women of colour. Other Horizons offers consideration and nuance to discussions around sovereignty, the colonial adventure, migration, national identity, and belonging in contemporary Australia. Abyss, a significant exhibition of works by Australian South Sea Islander artist Jasmine Togo-Brisby, explores South Sea Islander identity and history and interrogates plantation colonisation, blackbirding practices and slavery within the Australian and Pacific context. Abyss showcases Jasmine's interdisciplinary approach to storytelling, revealing personal and painful recent histories, while also highlighting the formation of new cultures and identities in the bellies of slave ships. Working with our curator, Glenn Pilkington, Jasmine has created the truly breathtaking, monumental work, As Above, So Below, which is seen in our Wadong Gallery, the largest of our exhibition spaces. So I would really encourage those of you who haven't already, please do spend some time with the work before you leave this evening. The galleries will remain open. Tonight, in this edition of Disclosure, titled Ask the Sea, a reference to Derek Walcott's poem titled The Sea is History, we are really thrilled to be joined by Jasmine Togo-Brisby, who has travelled from Meerjin, Brisbane, today to be with us, actually. We're thrilled that also in conversation with writer, activist and curator of ideas for the Perth Festival, Sisonke Msimang, in a captivating dialogue which charts Australian slavery, the trafficking of brown bodies across the Pacific, the body politic, South Sea Islander identity and belonging in the place we now call Australia. Jasmine Togo-Brisby was born in Murwillumbah, New South Wales in 1982. She was raised in Townsville, Queensland from the age of 8. She studied at the Queensland College of Art, Australia and Massey University in New Zealand. Togo-Brisby has a research-driven practice which examines the historical practice of blackbirding, the romanticised colloquialism for the Pacific slave trade. She delves into her own personal history and that of the Pacific slave trade, which saw her great-great-grandparents taken from Vanuatu and transported to Australia in 1899 under slave labour policies employed by the Australian government. As a 4th-generation Australian South Sea Islander, her work addresses the complexities of contemporary South Sea Islander culture and identity. She investigates complicated relationships of power, cultural identity, and political systems, and continues to build upon her research and artworks, employing installation, painting, lens-based media, and sculpture. Togo-Brisby sustains an ongoing dialogue with contemporary discourse, where she is committed to including South Sea narratives and identity globally. She has presented at international conferences, including the 2019 Fiji International Conference on Forced Labour and Migration, the 2020 Princeton University Global Plantation Symposium, the 2021 University of Oxford Women, Memory and Transmission Post-Colonial Perspectives from the Arts and Literature, among many others. Togo-Brisby is represented by Page Galleries, and her works can be found in numerous public and private collections throughout Australia and New Zealand. Known for her works on race, gender and democracy, Sisonke Msimang has authored 2 books, Always Another Country, a memoir of exile and home, and The Resurrection of Winnie Mandela. In 2021, she won the prestigious $60,000 Western Australian Writers' Fellowship as part of the Premier's Book Awards. Sisonke makes regular appearances on news programs like The Drum, Q&A, and SBS Insight, and has written for The Guardian, Sydney Morning Herald, The New York Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, Bloomberg, and Al Jazeera. Since moving here to Perth, Boorloo in 2014, she has worked with dozens of West Australian storytellers through her ongoing work as the head of storytelling at the Centre for Stories in Northbridge. Sisonke joined Perth Festival as curator of the 2020 Literary and Ideas program. Before I welcome Jasmine and Sisonke to the stage, just to let you know, we do normally open for questions at the end of our sessions, but we will always leave this decision with the artists, with Jasmine and Sisonke, should they feel like taking some questions from the audience at the end of tonight's discussion. Please join me in making Jasmine and Sisonke very welcome.
Jasmine brought drinks. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Hello, Jasmine. It's such a remarkable pleasure to have you here.
Hi. Likewise, yeah.
It's wonderful to be on Nungabuja. It is wonderful to be in the presence of friends and people we are yet to make friends with. And it's fantastic to be having this conversation about your incredible exhibition. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I really encourage you to do so after this conversation. It's powerful, and it's haunting, and it's beautiful, and incredibly thoughtful. And so today I thought we would have a conversation in 3 parts, Jasmine, if that's okay with you. So the first part of the conversation will be about slavery and blackbirding and plantation colonization, because so much of all of the pieces of your work are about these subjects. That's kind of the foundation and the bedrock of what you have formed your artistic practice around. And then I thought we could talk about the things that the descendants of slaves have made. So what the cultural identity and the imagination and all the kind of wondrous things that descendants of slaves have been able to make. And then I thought we could move into you and your artistic practice and what's next on the horizon. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay, great. So in 2020, people will remember that at the height of the Black Lives Matters protests, Scott Morrison famously insisted that Australia did not have a slave history. And he did that as a way of course, of insisting that there was no place for protests in this country. But he also, I think, did that out of a sense of genuine ignorance. And so I wanted us to start off this conversation to talk about blackbirding and what it was, and if you can ground us in the foundations of what is really a hidden history or deliberately hidden history in this country.
First of all, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and just would like to acknowledge the country in which I stand, and I'm very fortunate to have my work here, and very honoured and privileged. So yes. So the full history of blackbirding.
Yeah.
Basically, once slavery was abolished in other parts of the world, in America, those slave traders were out of work and looking for places where they could continue earning money and having their trade of work. So they fled to the Pacific, where they were looking for new nations to also plant cotton, which was Australia. So this was in 1847, which the first ship took people from Vanuatu into Sydney. The most common date that is known is 1863, when that was the Don Juan, which came in to Brisbane, and that sort of that's when they started the influx of like the Pacific being a highway of taking people from the Pacific, bringing them to Australia, and the ships going back, and that trade just went on and on and on until 1904-ish, when the White Australia policy started to commence. So does that sort of
and so the White Australia policy stops the importation of.
It also created the deportation of my people. So this is to date the largest deportation in Australian history is of South Sea Islanders or Ni Vanuatu, Solomon. Yeah.
So you've done the work, and now there's too many of you and Chinese and all of that stuff happening here. So it's time to go back.
Yeah. Which is, in one of my theories, is why we have such an invisibility today, is because our population is quite low due to the deportations.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so one of the things that, if you look at, global work around slavery, around the world, one of the things that everyone talks about and what's so clear in As Above, So Below, which is so evocative and beautiful, is this notion of the slave ship as a place where many things happened, and of course horrible suffering and human degradation happened, but also other creolization happened. And I know that you did a show called Home Sweet Home, which is very much about that notion of the kind of language and what comes out of slavery. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about what happened to these people who came to Australia, worked on plantations in sugar and cotton, were sent back but also stayed. What does that culture, what does that milieu, what did it create? What does it look like?
It created so much. But here, and also back on the islands, like that, just the impact that rupture had on the people and the land was so significant that it's... so like when you talk about Home Sweet Home, that's in Bislama, which is the common language in Vanuatu, which was actually created on the holds of ships, like in the holds of ships, because there's many nations coming together in those vessels and to communicate, and then to communicate with the slave traders and the plantation owners. There was a common language formed. So in Australia, we didn't inherit that language. I don't know that language, but in Vanuatu, it is spoken there. So that's just one, that's just one thing.
Talk to me about the tam tam, because if you look at the artwork that's mounted right there that people can see, the tam tam is sort of the central object that is used to create the shape of the hull of the slave ship.
I've been thinking about the slave ship icon, which is where this is sort of drawn from, the way that the holds of the ships, the way that the bodies were positioned and their layout. And I always wanted to make a work, but not sure what form I would use to represent the body. And the tam tam drum is a drum from Vanuatu. I know very well that Kakai is here, who is an actual carver from Vanuatu. And he does carve tam tam drums. So I'll just speak a little bit to it because I know there's a actual expert here. So they're carved from breadfruit trees. They stand over 3 meters tall, and they're then reburied in the ground, in the ceremonial grounds. And they're used for ceremony ritual, and also for, it was said that they were to use to communicate between the islands, and that when the lip of the drum is struck, it's the ancestor's voice that comes out of the drum. So what I've used is a a minimized, muted tourist object, which symbolizes those drums, which I thought was quite an interesting way to discuss South Sea identity. And yeah, that's what I did.
Talk to us a little bit about this idea of tourism and the South Sea Islander identity.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people might have watched White Lotus and Hawaii, and so that comes up as a kind of pop cultural thing that's in the air at the moment.
Yeah, so like cultural tourism, where you go back and find your roots and find your families that we've been separated from, and then as part of that, it's, we want to take something back with us to remember that time. So I have a whole collection of tam tam drums on my shelf. Is that what you mean? Like,
what I meant was the extent to which South Sea Islander economies are reliant on tourism and what that does to the place itself. And
like Vanuatu identities?
Yeah,
okay. That's completely reliant. That's the industry, right? So.
And is that part of what you were trying to do with choosing the?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
That's a project that I have in my heart and in my mind that I want to produce, which I haven't had the time and space for. But yeah, that is, and also with my other side business, that's something that we want to do as well. I don't want to go into it.
I'm smiling because before we got on stage, Jasmine and I were talking about her artistic process. So let's jump to that because we're there anyway. And so one of the things you were talking about was what happens when you're making a new work and what you leave in and what you leave out and how you come up with other ideas. So do you want to talk about that? And you can talk about it actually in relation to this work, if that's easiest. So how do you make a new work? And then how do other ones emerge out of that?
Yeah. I always have like these big grand ideas, I guess, and then I get started and I realize that there's too much that I've forced into this one space. And then it's just this process of eliminating and, really refining what it is that I want to say. And if one of the voices in the work is louder than the other, and, it's this negotiation between the visual language and what the viewer can read and what I want to say. And that also happens with the materials. So with As Above, So Below, changing that material from carved wood into plaster and making it very sort of flat and changing it. I'm really interested in the way that, just with the material, that material then has its own voice, and then you can have those things both speak at the same time is something that I'm really interested in doing. So yeah, it's a process of elimination really with my, it's just, and then as I was saying before, I have this work, and then in the making of this, I realized there's another at least 8 works which I need to make because I had too many ideas.
One of the initial ideas that you had with this was to carve a different face out of each individual tam-tam. But what works in this is the uniformity, because slavery was such a process of homogenizing that it didn't matter what your unique personality was, it didn't matter who you were and what you had experienced and who you loved, that it kind of... have you read Orlando Patterson?
No.
So Orlando Patterson is this African-American sociologist, and he writes about the idea of how... He talks specifically about the transatlantic slave trade, but I think it very much applies in this instance, about how it was what it did was create social death. So the idea is that there were lots of cultures in the world that already practiced slavery in themselves, within their culture. But in those slavery practices, you continued to know who your mother was. You continued to have access to your family. you weren't sent somewhere far away and you continued to have access to your language, mother tongue. Whereas with slavery, built into the process was this separation, which in many ways forced you to die socially and be completely reborn as this new thing. And so I think the uniformity and the putting the plaster over the tam-tams really has that. It reminded me of that kind of idea, and it really has that effect. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting that like a lot of people don't, in this part of the world, a lot of people don't quite grasp that rupture, that separating a people from one land and bringing them and isolating them to another is actually a crucial part in the success of slavery, indentured labour, blackbirding, whatever you want to name it. That's the key part of the success of it all. I mean, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it is the key part of it. And it's also the thing that makes it especially painful to a human.
It's water.
I've now made everyone think that she's drinking some kind of alcoholic beverage, but actually it's just very fancy water.
I'm so sorry.
I want to move to talk about the next sort of series in your work, which is those incredible sort of, they look like daguerreotypes. They're the photographs. Can you talk to us about what that's about, sort of turning the camera and making it, having a different kind of gaze?
Yeah, so you're close. They're embryotypes, so the next photography after daguerreotypes. And this came at a time when I was really spending a great deal of time in the archives and Queensland State Library in particular, and being able to go in and touch those images and look at the faces and think about, you know, like who they look like. Like, you know, we've got this community where we all are very quite close, like in Queensland. And, you know, I was able to be like, oh, that looks like such and such's family. And, you know, it's this really intimate and painful process. So I started to think about those images and how we can sort of go in and then they go back into the drawers and then they're kept there. But they're also available online, like they're accessible to everybody right now. If you Googled it, you would have access to our ancestors and you could use them how you like. And so it was really about this sort of creating a space. So I would project the archive. So the image that you're looking at right now is actually my daughter standing in front of one of our well-known archival images called Recruits, where it's islanders on the vessel where they've just arrived in Australia. So I've projected this image, and then my daughter has stood in, and we've recaptured that archive with us being part of it. So it's this trying to reconcile that space between and being with them and them with us, and even just the process of that, like being able to project them so large was really intense. And for like me, my mum and my daughter, we all participated in this. And so, yeah, it's...
Where did you present them? Where were they projected?
In my studio. Yeah.
The idea of taking care of ancestors and kind of reclaiming images and going back into the archive and treating those memories with a tenderness that I think the archive hasn't done for Black people, for enslaved people, for all sorts of people, is very beautiful. Do you feel like that is at the core of what you're often trying to do with your work? And did you set out to do that when you started thinking about your artistic practice?
Yeah, I think that's always a part of it. I mean, my practice is such a big mound of things that it is, and like things that I'm trying to achieve, and it's definitely about making space, and that's making space for us as South Sea Islanders right now, for our ancestors, for our children. You know, it's it's too much, you know.
Yeah, I do know. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff about generations.
Yeah.
Your mother and your daughter find their way into your work often, which is very beautiful also. And the filmic work, Mother Tongue, is, talk about that a little bit, because it's incredible, very beautiful, but also, again, all three of you are in it.
So the reason why I started using our bodies as part of my work was this sort of, we don't have a lot of, you know, we don't have a culture like, you know, when people think of the Pacific, they think of hibiscus, you know, they think of all of these beautiful Pacific islands, you know, language and art forms, and as if we're being, you know, earnestly Australian South Sea Islander, we don't have anything that sort of represents that, in my opinion, in my life journey. There's not one, you know, we have a flag and we have cane knives because we're so proud of those. But way too proud. But so when you're thinking about a material culture, we don't really have anything that somebody can go, oh, that's, you know, South Sea, the way that you would with most other cultures. So I started using our bodies as this like undeniable representation of Australian South Sea Islander, presence. And so just to sort of unpack that, like why me, my daughter and my mum, it's, you know, it's a lot more to it. And then it's also about we are these vessels that carry little vessels, and that relationship between the... I know I'm not answering your question, but it's okay.
I love where this is going. I wish I'd asked the question.
I'll get over there.
Hey, I forgot what I asked.
So, like in my family particularly, like the women are the knowledge holders, and it's our responsibility to know when to release our oral histories, our family, you know, like our children need to know where they came from, and where, you know, and they start asking anyway. I started asking. I remember asking, who are, like, we're not Indigenous, so who are we? Like, why are we these, like, brown bodies in Australia, but the only other brown bodies are Indigenous? So where did we come from? And so it's about that transmission, about that handing over of knowledge and that care, and it's drip fed because you have to wait until they're old enough to understand, and you don't want to traumatize them. And so as a woman who has a young woman as a child who's raised by a single mother, like, that was just an obvious part of my practice for me, or to incorporate that as part of my practice. So Mother Tongue was your...
Mother Tongue.
Mother Tongue.
And the Don Juan.
And the Don Juan. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Don Juan was the first vessel to arrive in Brisbane in 1863 with, I believe, either 67 or 76 Ni Vanuatu people to go out to the Robert Towns cotton plantation, which is out by Bow Desert. And so that vessel actually made its way to New Zealand. And it's not a shipwreck because it lays in the bay. It was like too far gone to be, too far gone to sort of go back out to the sea. It's quite ironically, it was called a coffin ship due to its state. So this vessel stayed in what they call like a holding bay in Dunedin, and until many years later, where they started to really deconstruct it, and they pulled apart the hold of the ship, and it was a fake wall which uncovered 300 sets of ankle and wrist shackles. And so that's when they realised what that vessel was. So I've been living in New Zealand for the last 7 years, and to find out that vessel still exists, that I'm able to go to it and, you know, have that encounter and to take my family. It was I'm clearly still haven't come to terms with it, but speaking with my mum and some of my elders and the local community there, the Māori community around, you know, what we wanted to do as possibly the only South Sea Islanders who had been to that site, because it's not well known. And the little bit of knowledge that they do share in the Maritime Museum there, it's quite romanticised from the like pirates' perspective, and there's no real, there's not even a thought of who the people who would have been held in those shackles, you know. That's so. I as an artist, mum, as part of my practice, we decided that we wanted to do some sort of blessing on this, what remains of this vessel, and you know, because it has a history of not only abducting our people but other people as well. So it's a really hard thing to to encounter and to deal with. So. I didn't know if it would be a work at the end of it, and that didn't really matter. I set everything up so that we could. I knew the vision that I would like, but I didn't put any parameters on my mother and what she was going to do as the elder in that space. So she prayed a little bit, and then she just started singing in Christian tongues, and I'm like rowing the boat and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Also, it was the first time I ever rowed a boat in my life. It was really, really bad.
Oh, it looked amazing.
No, I made like me, my mum and my daughter wear gumboots because I had no idea like what boating was. And so we had these like these gumboots up to here, which of course just sunk and then filled with water, and then our big island feet couldn't get them off. Like I had to cut my daughter out of them. It was just a hot mess. But anyway, that's
you have big feet like me.
Yeah, they're an 11. This is why I just wear Jordans.
Yeah, right.
Things you don't need to know about artists.
This idea of reckoning with history and with very painful pasts is obviously something that is happening everywhere. It's sitting here in Walyup, where we are, is a place with a very painful past and a painful history, and yet I'm so interested in how you think about and work with that, and kind of almost, I want to say invent, but not in a bad way, like how you sort of make a bridge between the past and the present. And that's exactly what you're doing. There's this moment in that film where the drone is looking down, and then there's a car that goes around, and it's really very special.
Yeah.
Because time doesn't stand still.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Like I had to get an editor in to take out my cameraman who was in there. Also thinks you don't need to know about work. And she's like, do you want me to take out the car? I was like, absolutely not. The car needs to stay. Like, that's so poignant in this work, is to really make you aware of what time it is, you know? And I kind of see myself as a bit of a cultural like creator a little bit. Like, it's definitely making from the voids, I would say. Which is really exciting, because it's, on an artistic level, it's very exciting for a creator, but it's also super daunting because you don't have any reference. There's no, like in terms of like theory or other artists, it's like you just kind of a little bit on your own. And yeah, like, you know, but I make sure that I'm held accountable always to our elders. And that's sort of like my, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about relationships and connections that were forged between South Sea Islander people who were brought here and Indigenous communities? Was there mixing and marriage and all of that kind of stuff? And how does that look today?
Yeah, of course. Like most people, I'm a bit of an oddity because most people like are either South Sea and Aboriginal and Torres Strait, or you know, like everybody's very mixed. Like my daughter is Aboriginal, Torres Strait, and South Sea. So, and most of my family are Aboriginal as well. So, everybody's very blended, and so really for me, there was just always this sort of like that's my people, but there's always like this line where I can't sort of cross, which was really, like, I think that's why I am who I am and why I do this in the first place, really. Because if I was Indigenous as well, not that this is going to sound awful, like, but I would have a cultural grounding, like I would have this sort of, and that people around me would have the knowledge of who I was. And I don't mean that with any disrespect whatsoever. I'm just speaking from my experience as a child, even being excluded from things which my cousins could go to, but I couldn't. I mean, my sisters couldn't. So it's quite complex. And during the slave times, it was really harsh, like because there was a forced separation by the colonisers and things which our people wouldn't have chose to do to each other, they had to. Yeah. So that is part, you know.
The history.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is all part of, I think, this reckoning that's happening at this moment, this idea of how we uncover what's hidden and deal with the complexity and the difficulties and, difficult.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time? I forgot that the audience is here.
I have to do that, otherwise I won't talk.
We're good. Do we have any questions from the audience? Because I could keep going. Yes.
When the people were deported, were they taken back to where they belonged originally, or just
Were people taken to the right island? Were they taken back to where they came from, or just taken somewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. More often than not, they were not taken to their rightful lands. So it cost money to do the deportation, and most captains would opt to just go to the closest land. So while there are some, you know, we know that some people did go back to Vanuatu, we also know that some sort of got dumped in, quite literally, in many different islands as close to shore. So it's complicated.
So it's an experience of slavery or blackbirding. Can you tell us about the etymology of blackbirding?
It was actually from the transatlantic slave trade, that term. And my theory, here we go again, is that it's not a well-known term because they didn't need to use the term blackbirding because slavery was legal. So they started using it to sort of as a, you know, to confuse people as to what it was.
So it was a
when
euphemism.
They came. Yeah. So it was to steal, it was to go in under the cover of darkness to abduct black bodies. That's basically where blackbirding comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it describes the kidnapping part of the
Yeah.
whole story. So a very parallel, incredibly parallel history to the Atlantic slave trade.
Yeah, well, it's the same
modus
people.
operandi, same people.
Like Bully Hayes came over from America, you know, and he lived in New Zealand for a while and done you know, it's this. Like the timeline sort of, they cut it off, but the timeline continues over in this part of the world. And yeah, I think,
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Leslie.
Jasmine, first of all, thank you so much. When I saw your exhibition, I had two very visceral reactions. First of all, I was completely grief-stricken. I just couldn't imagine how you sustained yourself throughout the creation of this extraordinary 4-part exhibition. And the second was that awe of your courage. I was wondering if you could explain, did you conceive of this, what was the timeline? Did it all come together in your mind that you wanted to do each of these various components? Or how did it just sort of formulate in your mind? Would you mind explaining that process?
Like all of the different elements of the exhibition?
Yeah. The amazing models that we see here, the blackbirds, that amazing boat going around, which I found intensely moving, the main exhibition, of course, and the photographs. Thank you.
So outside of As Above, So Below, which is the large installation, that's the only new work. All of the other works, the photographs and the sculptural elements and the video work, they're all existing, and they've been created over about the last 5... What date has that got on it? That's the wrong date. This is very wrong. Over like at least the last 5 years. So, yeah, it's not a quick process. Like, my practice takes quite a lot of time, and I'm coming to terms with that. Not every artist and the way that they work looks the same. I'm about to go to Sydney next month and just spend 2 weeks in the archives, and that's part of creating a work, you know what I mean? Like, that's just as much a part of as it is to like get out a camera and take the photo itself. So I started making the new installation in September, and Glenn tells me that I finished it in February. But it wasn't. It was January. Can't be. It's shaking. Oh, because I bought a box on the plane, yeah.
And the exhibition opened in February.
Yeah, that's okay. You're right. Yeah, I didn't tell him that I was going to bring him on the plane. He would have freaked out.
Insurance.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's really intense like that. And when I do make big installations like that, it's really intense work, both physically and mentally. I work all day. I'll stop and I'll spend a little bit of time with my daughter and eat dinner, and then I go back and I work all night. And it's often because I'm dysfunctionally functioning. But it's also just part of that. Once I'm in that, and once this is there, and it doesn't want to leave, and it just wants to do the job, and it's I don't know that it's a healthy process, but I stay in that mode until it's completed, and then I kind of crash.
And do you feel a sense of healing when it's finished? Like, what's the good part?
I mean, the good part is the making too, you know, like it's unveiling each one of these out of a mould, like once it's been cast, and like being able to just sort of spend time and really think and reflect. And it's, you know, it's that bittersweet, you know, like it's, and I mean, God, do I want to talk about this? Like, you know, during install, we had just lost my nana. And so I was very aware, like when I was laying these, each one, hundreds of them, that this was our bodies, you know, like that was just, there's parts of the work that you don't feel until you feel it. And that was one of the big ones for me. So it's like, it's still good. It's just a bit shit. Yeah. Like
yeah, totally. Yes.
Jasmine, I've yet to see the exhibition. I've yet to see the exhibition. So does this mean that this comes apart and it's only a temporary installation?
Oh yeah. Yeah, she comes apart all right. And yeah, it's...
How will that make you feel?
I'm never here for the de-install. Like, I'm never around. Like, it's always the artist comes to install the work. But it's... I don't know, it's interesting. It's I guess it's something that I don't give a great deal. I know on the day, and I think about, oh, who's going to be touching them and where are they going? You know, like it's you know, you think about, because you've had such I've had such an intimate relationship with them, and I wonder who's going to be caring for them. So yeah, but I mean, it's part of it. The artist is never usually there for de-install, and then I'm excited for where it goes next. Yeah.
So someone else gets it and it goes somewhere else,
Yeah,
and it
well,
gets
usually
reset up.
that's
Yeah.
what you try for.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want this in my studio. Absolutely not.
Yes.
Hi, Jasmine.
Hi.
I know blackbirding is not even really known that well in Australia. We kind of live a bit of cultural amnesia here. Is New Zealand aware of the blackbirding?
It's yeah. It it's kind of similar to Australia. You know, because this, you know, it's a big Tongan community in Aotearoa, so there's the Tongan people were also abducted in blackbirding, so they know of their stories. But it's that, I think that difference is that they continue to be Tongan, you know, and so there's this thing of they at first struggled to understand what Australian South Sea Islander is. Is it just Ni Vanuatu or Solomon? Like, it's this slave diaspora identity. So I would say, to try and answer your question, it's very similar to Australia. Some people know, some people don't know. But particularly in the Tongan community, they do have a knowledge of it, and they'll have some sort of oral histories of their ancestors, being abducted. But yeah, does that even answer that question?
Yes.
Thank you. It's really powerful to see your work. I was wondering if you could talk about the ceiling roses. It's such a kind of crazy connection that I'd never heard about, the slave trade and the ceiling roses that just sort of decorate these houses everywhere. Yeah, could you explain that?
Yeah, I can. That's a massive part of my work, which we just didn't even tap into. So my great-great-grandparents were actually, my granny was a house servant and grandfather was the yardman. And so they were enslaved to a very wealthy Sydney family called the Wunderlichs. And the Wunderlichs, Yes. And that my granny was 8 years old when she was abducted, and grandfather was a early teen, and so that's actually how they met. They met at that house, working for those people. So the Wunderlichs, Ernest Wunderlich, who my great-grandparents worked for, and his two brothers, they had this ceiling company called Wunderlich Ceilings, who did pressed tin panels for the ceiling and plaster rosettes and all sorts of different things. You can Google. Are you Googling them? Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
So yeah, Wunderlich ceilings. So I was through our own personal archive in my family and through the institutional archive, I was able to trace my ancestors to that house in Sydney. And so then it sort of really accelerated my research into another direction, which was not expected, because I was then researching the family that owned my family. And seeing how much of them is considered valuable and is archived in all of our institutions in Australia and in New Zealand, because they had a foundry in New Zealand as well. And so I really just thought that I would insert my story, my family's story, into their story by using their material culture as part of my practice. And so, yeah, I did a whole project of these light boxes in Wellington, and I titled them with the archival numbers. So if anybody is to ever search for that archive, it comes up with both of us.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
you're gaming the algorithm.
yeah, just gotta fuck with it.
I love it. That's
Yeah.
So that leads me to a question I was going to ask you before, which is about doing archival research and what. This is like sounds like a very basic question that like a year 5 would ask, but like, what's it like? What's it like when you're, in a state library, and what are you looking for and what are you looking at? Because there's so much that we know about archival silence, right? That often, Indigenous people, we're not there.
Yeah.
So what are you looking for, and what's it like, and how do you know what you've found?
Yeah. So it depends. But when I'm searching for my direct lineage, I'm looking for multiple spellings of our name, because that was spelled like my granny's maiden name has got 4 or 5 different spellings. And then grandfather's has also got like 3 different spellings. And so I'm scouring through, like trying to find something which will lead to something else. But I mean, even like, I'll just tell you the story because I think it's quite remarkable. I was looking through my nana's like biscuit tins of photos, because that's our archive, is a biscuit tin, rusted and like so great for photographs, but it's what we do. And I was just looking through, like, because that's what I do when I go to Mackay, just look through photos and spend time with family. And I actually found this photograph in our photographs of the Wunderlichs. Wow. And I was just like froze, and I ran into the kitchen where my auntie was, and I was like, do you know who this is? She's like, who are those white people? And I was like, this is them, because I'd been researching them for like the last 6 months. And she was like, well, how did they get? And then, so this was that thing. I was like, if we have a photo of them in our archive,
They must have photos of you all.
there's got to be a photo of my ancestors in theirs. And so it just sprouts off in all different directions. Research is just, you don't know what's going to happen, what you're going to find, which is going to lead to something else, which is super exciting, but also really, it can be really harmful if you stay there too long. Like, I went to the powerhouse and spent a day in there looking through, like, they had brought in trolleys and trolleys and trolleys of Wunderlich stuff, like catalogues and like so much stuff. And I was so overwhelmed at that revelation of how much they just, like, they make space for this, like, is for slave owner stuff, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
They take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm giving you grade 5 answers now.
No, that's a great. No, that's very interesting. And there's also all this work about that's happening. So my field is not visual; it's text, and so there's all this stuff happening, in the written form, and lots of really interesting Aboriginal writers across Australia who are doing important work with going into the archives and then kind of imagining new things or rearranging what you find in the archive. And so Elficia Saki is, won the Premier's Prize for debut work of poetry. And what her poetry is letters found in the archive that were sent from her ancestors and her relatives asking for their children. And so she's taken those real artifacts, real things, real letters, which are stored in the State Library, not in her family's archives, and rearranged them on the page really beautifully, and then written back to them. So it's this act of taking history and then speaking back to it, which is so much of what you do. You should really, I should have bought you that as a present.
That's crazy, because how I'm able to link my family to the Wunderlichs is through a letter which Mrs. Wunderlich had written to my granny, asking where she is and why she hasn't heard from her. And so my exhibition was titled Dear Mrs. Wunderlich. It's the same thing. That's insane.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so don't look at me like that.
Goosebumps.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess this, which is the other part. So often when we talk about slavery, and there's these incredible African American writers who have done this work, and in contemporary sense, I think about the work of people like Christina Sharp. Do you know her work?
Yeah.
In the Wake.
Yes.
All of that stuff. And Saidiya Hartman, who take photographs and kind of reimagine what's happening. So there's like all this really interesting stuff. But one of the reasons I love Saidiya Hartman is because she also has so much joy with it. She has so much fun. Yeah. There's a lot going on in there that's not just the terror and the suffering and the horror, which is of course real. And so I'm wondering what you find in the archive and what you find in your work that is about sort of surprising revelations about the connections between people. So I'm wondering about intimacy beyond the violence.
Yeah.
Is that a future project? Is there stuff that you've thought about and it's part of those edits that you put it to the side and you think, oh, we've got to get through this other stuff first?
I don't know if I'm going to answer you properly. Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't spent time in the archives for a while because it takes a lot out of me. So, yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing if I've grown any strength and, how I will respond being in that space again. I feel like it's, I'm really supported with the Sydney Museum. They have, they know what I'm doing, like usually I'm in there on my own accord. Nobody really knows what I'm doing because if they knew what I was doing, they probably wouldn't like that I was there. So we just kind of like hush about it. I'm joking, but so, but I mean, it's real, like, that's, it's...
Little old me, no, I'm not here.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like hopefully that support and like there's it's an assistant who's already starting to search for things for me. So I feel like I have help in the search. Can
you talk about what you're doing next?
Like,
what's the next project, or is that a secret?
Oh, there's so many secrets that I can't talk about.
That's okay.
Yeah, there's.
So speaking of fun, I love your T-shirt. And I know that it's a T-shirt that's part of your collection that you and your sister do.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, Miss Brown Sugar.
Yeah, well, do you want me to tell you the story that I told you before? Okay.
Tell them.
Growing up, in my 20s, and it's like, we never really had any garments to wear to represent our culture or anything like that. And so me and my sisters, when we were on like a girls' trip to Sydney, we decided to make some shirts. And this was like, 2008 or something. And we got this... all three of us it said South Sea Sister, like in gold foil, and then we had the big Vanuatu flag on the back. And it really, we took, we wore them back to Mackay and stuff, and everyone was like, oh my God, your shirt's so deadly. Like, and like, because nothing at that time, and still even now, is not really being made in that way where it speaks directly to our identity and where we can see ourselves within, what was like garments that we can be proud to sort of wear. So my sister's been living in America and I've been living in Aotearoa, so we've just both moved back in the last 6 months, and we decided that we'd we'd do this properly and actually, make a business of it so that it can create visibility, be empowering so that our people can be proud to wear something. And they are, they are really, loving it.
So you can check out Jasmine's Instagram.
SouthSeaSisters.com.
South Sea Sisters. And you can get some shirts.
Glenn's wearing another garment over on... Yeah, but no, it's, it was, being in New Zealand as well was every island represents in their own way. And I was that's so cool, and how do we do that? So it really just sort of switched me on to other ways to be present, other ways to take up space and, tell our story. Yeah.
That's right. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. Making you work, Anna.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thanks very much for your work. And you said you experienced as a young girl not really having a cultural grounding because of your cousins who had connection to their indigenous culture. Can you talk a little bit about how the process was for you of connecting to your South Island culture and how that looked for you?
The process of connecting to my culture? Is that... So I always I always knew I was South Sea. There wasn't this sort of, one day I got sat down and told that this is who I was. It was always part of the home. And I guess what I mean is in that there are spaces for Indigenous people, right? Just there's one story. Me and all my cousins went to the same primary school. And all my cousins were able to go to homework program. It was an Indigenous run, homework program, but I was not able to go. So it's, and this just is what it is. It's not to say that that's right or wrong. It just is, right? And so it's those sort of experiences of exclusion from the people who you are. I am my cousins, and they are me. But that bloodline, not having that bloodline makes you on the other side of that. And so I think what's important to remember is that at that time we were the largest dark-skinned migrant group in Australia. So of course we were always going to be close with the Indigenous community here in Australia. So it's not so much about me having connection to my culture, because I've always have, but the culture is quite invisible. It's not a tangible culture. I was sort of trying to articulate earlier. It's not. It's mannerisms, it's words, it's understanding and connecting through different ways.
So there's an orality to it. There's a livedness to it. Yep.
And you go back to Mackay, I turn on my South Sea voice, it's, it's, So it's complex. Mm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, does that?
Yeah. Anyone else with a question from the audience? Yes, in the back over there. They're doing it on purpose, Anna.
Poor Anna.
Hello. I don't know how to frame this question, so just bear with me. How do you... So you said you went back, in terms of cultural tourism, you visited the Pacific Islands. How do you feel that people who are since deportation perhaps born in those islands, how does their experience perhaps relate to you, and where do you find are the differences where you... I don't know, in terms of how does that relate, essentially?
Are you more Aussie? Are you more Vanuatu? What does it mean to go back to, given all these ruptures?
I think that's what I'm always sort of trying to, in different ways, sort of explain through my practice. It's not really quite Australian, not really quite ni Vanuatu, we're this in between. And when I go back to Vanuatu, it's incredible because they ask you from Queensland, like they know the stories, that's their people, that's my people, that's our people. And so we connect through that, and that we've reconnected with our families that, you know, as well. So we have our families over there that we go and spend time with. But culturally, we're not near Vanuatu, you know, like our culture was created on the holds of slave ships on their way to Australia. And we weren't, you know, our ancestors weren't able to speak language here, you know, all that culture was wiped out. And so I'm 4th generation, and this is what you get, you know. That's a really, I feel like that question is like my exegesis, you know. Yeah.
Kylie?
Okay?
Where's the mic?
Yeah, it's a bit shit, eh?
Hey Jasmine, my name's Kylie. Welcome to Nyunga Buja. I'm Nyunga. I haven't seen your exhibition yet. It's lovely hearing you speak. I'm curious to hear something a little different that perhaps you might not get from a non-Nyunga person in the audience, but I would love to hear maybe 1 or 2 moments where you've been really surprised by another South Sea Islander that has wanted to come to you personally and celebrate your work, celebrate your journey, and what you're putting into the world as you, as an artist, as everything you are, not an in-between or not from anywhere or not from somewhere in particular, but as you, as you're growing your child, as you're connecting dots for family. Sisonke mentioned earlier that the kind of invention, for lack of a better word in English, of a bridge between the two, but I really just want to hear from you and your soul what sort of beautiful gifts you've received from other women or South Sea Islander people about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Great question.
Thank you. Gosh, gone all deep on me. I haven't cried this talk, so that's great.
If anyone's going to make you cry, it's Kylie.
A lot of the moments which stick with me are from family members. Is that okay? Or do you want outside of family?
No.
Just yell at me.
Family you want to talk about?
Yeah. Damn you, you're going to make me cry. My uncles are very hard people, you know, and to see them moved in a way that they can see themselves within my work and see our story, you know, that just stays in my vessel and keeps me moving forward. And those moments really stand out. As soon as you asked me that question, that's the vision that I had. Because you don't see these men emotional ever. And to see them just stand in front of my work and, yeah. So, yeah. And I think, I mean, I really feel like, if we're going to be all spiritual, I do feel like this is what I was put here to do. Like, I don't know if I'm going to answer you, but I feel like I'm doing what this vessel was supposed to do. Like, I always knew I was weird, and I got told I was weird by my mum. But to put that weirdness, like when you connect those things to make this do these things, like it all just connected. And so I don't know. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Jasmine. And I think that the way that Kylie framed the question is a really great way to return to the reason for the work.
Yeah.
That the purpose of the work is your uncles. The purpose
Yeah,
of your work is community.
It's that healing, you know, like, because even when that's part of it, is the healing, because, you know, we kind of, particularly the generation before me, but also like my nana and that with me, like, they didn't want to talk about the past. It was to protect us. They didn't want to, you know, really, they thought we're in Australia now, you know, get on with it. This is where we are, this is what we do, and you don't need to talk about it, you know, a lot of the time in most families. So you kind of need to heal from that to really move forward in a lot of ways. So, I mean, God, that's really grandiose to sort of say that my work could do that, but if it could have a moment even in that space, then yeah, I'm grateful.
Yeah, and if artists aren't going to be grandiose, then who is? Yes.
Jasmine, thank you so much for sharing so generously tonight. I think, yeah, I've worked with you for 3 years on projects, and it's been a great privilege. And we've talked a lot tonight in the deficit in terms of things that have been lost. And I just wanted to come back to that thing you shared with me in 2021, which was that in the bellies of these ships were South Sea possibility.
Yep.
And this was a birthplace as much as a place of rupture and violence, and to maybe think about that, and also the legacy that you're making for Eden, which I think is miraculous and so incredibly rich and full of joy, and will help her navigate the world and her children as well. So more a reflection and to kind of come back to that idea of possibility.
Yeah, I don't mean to speak in deficit. It just is kind of like I'm coded like that. But yeah, it is absolutely all those things. Like, yeah, it's like it was when I actually, this is answering one of your questions, which you didn't really ask me yet. It was when I had my daughter in 2006, when I really decided that I needed to actually try and do something which would make her future a little easier. As a South Sea, Torres Strait Aboriginal woman in the world. Yeah, so that really triggered it for me, and that's when I sort of started studying, and yeah.
Tell us about that. So what was that studying journey, and what was the realization you had?
I'm going to go back to deficit, Glenn. I can't.
I think it's a big part of the story. It's all good.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't see, like, I was studying in Queensland, obviously, and I didn't really see anything that I could relate to, and so yeah, I mean, inevitably that's why I ended up over in New Zealand, to sort of try and centre myself in Pacific dialogue, to try and find a place within that, and I did, and I have, which is amazing.
And now you're back.
And I'm back.
So why have you come back?
COVID. It's just like that.
The new C word.
Yeah, I know. That sort of triggered it, like having that time when we couldn't get to family if we needed to, and we lost people during COVID, and fortunately there was a 2-week window where I came in and went back, but it was just time. I felt like that time had served its purpose. Yeah. Are we done?
Anyone else?
It's an emotional journey that you're going through, extremely complex, and I commend you for how you're speaking about it. But how do you ground yourself in preparation to do the work that you have to do?
kind of the question I was asking you before.
How do I ground myself?
Well, it was about the thing about it's so hard. Where's just the healing? Do you feel like there's a healing at the end of the process? And you said the work itself makes you feel good.
Well, yeah, it's like a cathartic sort of, and also I think the thing that I find very special and I feel very privileged and honoured about my practice is that it's quite, it's almost like a meditation, and this is going to sound real woo-woo, but I don't care because it's who I am. When I'm in that space, like I was talking about the making and how it's like all day and all night, I really feel like I'm in communion with my ancestors during that time, and it's just me and there's no other disruptions, and they're able to enter into my realm in some kind of way. I really do feel, I know what I sound like, but like it truly is that, and it's so special, and I know that a lot of artists don't have that, but that's the way that they're able to enter my consciousness. Yeah. And so I don't know if I prep for it. What I really am thinking about is the aftermath. So it's just like, and that's, I guess, the preparation for the next one, which is, I know now that I just need to be alone. Like I just need to be alone for at least a month, which is a long time. But when you make work that's this intense, and it's part of that process, and to force myself out of that would not be doing me any good at all, because I have to heal from the making. Yeah.
And that's the care that's so evident in the work. So if you haven't seen it, please go and see it, because you feel it. It's not...
Oh, you do?
You do. You definitely feel that there's a tenderness and a real deep spirituality and care in the work. It makes you observe the work and you want to be quiet, which is, I think, a testament to how you make the viewer and the observer feel. Yeah. Should we wrap up? We've been talking for like an hour and a half.
It's a long time.
Can I just say a specific thank you to any South Sea Islander people who are in the house, and particularly a thank you to Kylie, who is also here, because I think it is important to recognize that we are Noongar Boodja, not just at the beginning, but also at the end, as we close and as we think about the depth and richness and importance of these kind of conversations, because we are talking about ancestors, and so we are not here unwatched.
Yes.
So I wanted to say that. There's a poem. Glenn had suggested that we read a poem, and I'm not going to read that one, although it's a special one. But the quick poem by Lucille Clifton, who's an African-American poet from the West Indies, and Jasmine said she wants me to read it, so I'll read it. It's very short, and it's called Blessing for the Boats. And I think it's a beautiful way to depart. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love your back. May you open your eyes to water, waving forever, and may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that. Blessing for the boats.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being such an amazing audience.